Hello, boys and girls and babes. Welcome back to the Janaea Talks Caps podcast. As always, so glad to have you all here with us today. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for listening. And even if you're not really listening, thank you for at least allowing me to be the background noise in what must be a very interesting life you live. Today, we are going to be talking prospects because, someday, assuming that Alex Ovechkin and Nicholas Backstrom ever do actually start to age at all, which at this point is a very big if. We still haven't been able to confirm that they are in fact actually human beings and not some type of cyborgs or aliens immune to the effects of father time. But assuming that they ever do actually start to age, the Caps are eventually going to need some new young blood injected into the lineup. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the noteworthy prospects the Capitals have in their system now, with special attention being paid to those who are likely to have a future in the NHL, potentially with your Washington Capitals, obviously barring trades or any other sorts of extenuating circumstances. There are a number of guys in the cap system right now who I would say definitely look like future NHLers, and a few are even from the most recent entry draft back in June of this year. So why don't we start with that draft class? Now, the Washington Capitals organization, it's no secret really, has been one of the absolute best, if not the best of the best, when it comes to drafting over the last, 15 years, give or take. The Caps organization has kind of set the standard in the NHL for drafting over the last decade plus, as so many of the Caps stars and superstars of the last 10 to 15 years are homegrown players who the Caps drafted, developed, nurtured, and then signed long term. In fact, of the 20 players who suited up for the Capitals in the Stanley Cup clinching victory in Game 5 against the Vegas Golden Knights, 13 were drafted by and or had played their entire NHL careers to that point with the Washington Capitals. Of their top 6 forward group, which has been an absolute juggernaut for the past decade and which was so instrumental in them hoisting Lord Stanley's Cup, 5 of those 6 guys were Capitals draft picks. Only TJ Oshie was acquired via trade. Those are insanely high percentages of draft picks, quote-unquote, working out in today's NHL. So a huge tip of the cap to Ross Mahoney and the rest of the Capitals scouting staff. The 2019 NHL entry draft was no different for the Caps, as they got universally high draft grades from all of the expert analysts after making a number of picks which could probably be considered steals. In the first round, the Caps took London Knights center Connor McMichael with the 25th overall pick. McMichael put up big numbers with the Knights leading up to the NHL draft, potting 36 goals and 72 points in 67 games. He is a fantastic skater who has superior playmaking ability, a wicked release on his wrist shot, and he's excellent defensively as well. The Caps also had the added bonus that a man who they know very well, Dale Hunter, is running the show in London for the Knights, and so they're always able to get his inside knowledge on Knights players. Because of this, the Caps obviously feel very confident in who McMichael is, not only as a hockey player, but also as a person as well, which I think is actually pretty damn important when you're spending a first-round draft pick on someone. You want to know that they're not a dick. So when you add all of this up, immediately after the draft, I would have given this pick an A- rating, but I feel confident in upgrading that to an A rating now after watching how McMichael has performed this summer, first in the prospect showcase and now in main training camp for the big club. He's been excellent. He's putting up goals and points every game in every scenario while simultaneously being very responsible and not making any mistakes defensively. I love watching this kid play. He's talented and he is smart as well. You watch him on the ice, his hockey IQ is so high. To project his future fit in the NHL, I'd say he fits right into that category of a very good second-line center who consistently puts up 25-plus goals for you every year, while being someone who you can also really rely on defensively as well. As for how far out he is from actually being ready for the NHL, I'd say give him 2 years and he will be more than ready. A scenario that I could potentially see taking place would be 2 years from now, where the Caps trade Lars Eller to free up $3.5 million in salary cap space, replacing him with the younger and much cheaper Connor McMichael, and therefore making some extra room on the cap for Alex Ovechkin's new contract. I would probably bet on that being exactly what will happen, actually. In the second round of the 2019 entry draft, the Caps made a pick for the guy who analysts are calling the steal of the whole entire draft, and that would be Brett Leason. And I would have to agree with them. I was so excited, like literally so excited when the Caps selected Leason, because I already knew who Leason was. As a Canadian, I'd watched him light it up for Canada's World Junior team during the Christmas season, just 6 months before the draft. I honestly could not believe that he had fallen as deep as he had into the second round, and neither could any of the analysts on my television sets. Leason is a first-round talent, and the Caps somehow managed to have him fall in their lap at 56th overall in the second round. This is not the first time that this type of good fortune has been bestowed upon the Caps. You will probably remember TSN's Bob McKenzie was absolutely dumbfounded at how Evgeny Kuznetsov could have fallen all the way to the end of the first round in 2010, saying that he unquestionably has the talent of a top 3 overall pick. And Bob was right, as per usual. With Brett Leason, first of all, he's fucking 6'5". If you need a visual representation of how big that is, just think the Statue of Liberty. He is bigger than Tom Wilson, for fuck's sake. That is a big dude. He's good in all 3 zones, and he consistently creates all types of offense from all areas of the ice. He uses his size and his reach very, very well. He has a high hockey IQ as well that sees him get open in dangerous scoring areas of the ice. And when he does get open, which again is very often, he has terrific finish. He scored 36 goals last season, and his playmaking ability is also top of the class, as he racked up a team-leading 53 assists last season as well, in just 55 games. So you can see why many analysts were screaming in disbelief as he fell all the way to 56th overall. I would say a nearly perfect NHL comparable would be Mark Stone, who you'll remember had several teams fighting to the death over him at last season's NHL trade deadline. So overall, I'd give this selection a solid A rating as well, if not A+, just for the fact that they were able to get him in the second round instead of the first round. Leason performed very well in the prospect showcase and now in main training camp as well, scoring goals and putting up points and showing off the size and touch around the net that had Capitals scouts drooling. I would say for Leason, he's likely only a year out from being a full-time NHLer, and it probably wouldn't even be that long if the Capitals' forward depth at the NHL level wasn't so stacked. He'll see some time with the big club this season. I would bet on that. I think overall, you're looking at a guy who will eventually fit on your team as a top 9 forward. Where exactly in the top 9 will he slot in? That depends and could probably change almost daily depending on what the coaching staff will want to do. His talent is probably most in line with playing on the second line for most NHL teams, but like I said, the Caps have a lot of depth up front, so maybe he's a third liner here. But on the flip side, he could also be one of those Tom Wilson, Mike Knuble types, the big body with relatively quick hands and a deft touch around the net, who you can put on the top line to play with the Alex Ovechkins and the Nicklas Backstroms. So it probably depends a lot on chemistry and on the line combinations that coaches want to go with. But talent-wise, I think he's a second-line winger in the NHL. And then in the third round of the 2019 entry draft, the Caps drafted Brett Leason's line mate from the WHL's Prince Albert Raiders, center Alexei Protas. Protas, much like Brett Leason, is an absolute beast. He stands 6'6" and already 210 pounds at age 18. Protas, being only 18 years old, has already been returned to his junior team, but he was easily one of the best players playing in the Capitals' first few preseason games. In his NHL preseason debut, as a matter of fact, he scored a goal and added 2 assists for a total of 3 points and the honor of being the first star of the night as well. And more than that, more than just the stats on the box score sheet, was also the way he looked out there on the ice. He's huge, he's intimidating, he's skilled. In the WHL, they've nicknamed him the Viper. I kid you not. And watching him in the Capitals preseason, it's easy to see why. I'd give this third round selection an A- rating, and I would say he's probably about 3 years out from being NHL ready at this point. He's still very young and very raw, but he's got the physical package, he's got a lot of natural ability, and he's got a lot of potential. It'll take a few years for the Capitals organization to fine-tune everything, but the payoff could potentially be huge once he is NHL ready. I would project Protas as an eventual middle six forward in the NHL, and one who can definitely provide some punch, both literally with his physical size and metaphorically with his scoring potential. But the Caps are going to want to keep this bun in the developmental oven for a few years until they get the temperature just right to pull it out. And of course, the Caps have a lot of good and great prospects chosen sometime before the 2019 entry draft as well. So let's take a look at some of them. One of the biggest names is obviously goaltender Ilya Samsonov, who is widely considered to be the best goaltender not currently playing in the NHL. Simply put, he is a stud. He was the Caps' first-round pick in 2018. Now, the Caps don't normally use their first-round picks on goaltenders, as the Capitals organization has such a superior scouting department, and they've had great luck with goalies, as they've been able to identify early the ones who have a lot of raw talent, natural athletic ability, and potential, and then they've been able to develop them to reach that potential by fine-tuning their techniques, as well as the mental aspects of a game that are so important when you're a goaltender. And the Capitals organization, way more so than any other organization, has consistently been able to do this, drafting goalies usually in later rounds, where you're just kind of throwing shit at the wall and hoping something is going to stick, and then coaching them into becoming studs. Semyon Varlamov, obviously Braden Holtby, Philip Grubauer, hell, even Michael Neuwirth brought the Caps a return when they finally decided to trade him. DC has been a factory pumping out goaltenders who either rack up wins for the home team or bring a significant return in a trade. And the Caps have always been able to trade their goalies because they've always had so many good ones. Even now, obviously Holtby is the guy, Stanley Cup winner and a Vezina Trophy winner as well. But you have Samsonov, you have Phoenix Copley, who's been developed into being very serviceable as well. And then you have Vitek Vanacek, who, same as Copley, has been given the appropriate amount of time by the organization to develop properly, and who has now really blossomed. The Caps have 3 guys who could potentially be their backup goaltender this season. That in itself should tell you a lot about their overwhelming depth and success at drafting at the goaltending position. But even though the Caps usually like to pick their goalies in the later rounds of drafts, Braden Holtby is quite possibly the best 4th-round draft pick ever in NHL history. When it came to taking Ilya Samsonov in the first round, Samsonov was simply too good to pass up. Simply put, he's a future number 1 goaltender on probably just about any NHL team. He is that good. And if the Caps do end up finding a way to re-sign Braden Holtby, then Samsonov is going to fetch them one hell of a return in a trade. You don't keep a goalie like that around just to be your backup. He's too good, and that would be a waste of an asset. He will either be the starter here when the Caps part ways with Holtby, or he will bring a mega return in a trade if the Caps re-sign Holtby. Samsonov is an A-plus prospect. A+++. Another big name in the Caps prospect pool is Alexander Alexeyev. The monstrous defenseman was the Caps' first-round pick at the 2018 NHL draft. And the moment that they picked him, my first thought was that in Washington, you really can't go wrong with a Russian named Alexander. Am I right? Of course I'm right. Anyways, Alexeyev is 6'4", and he's really the all-around, good-at-everything type of defenseman. His offense is great. He was at nearly a point per game as a defenseman for the Red Deer Rebels last season. He has a powerful shot. He's smart. He makes great passes. He can quarterback a power play. He's physical, and his defense is stifling as well. And for being 6'4", the dude can really skate. He gets around the ice really, really well. Like I said, he's that all-around type of defenseman who can do anything that you want him to do. An added bonus, he's a great kid. He's got a great attitude, and he says that if he can't be up with the Capitals yet this season, then he wants to be the best defenseman in Hershey and be the guy who his coaches and teammates can count on in all situations. Overall, Alexeyev has an A rating as a prospect and is projected to eventually be a top pairing defenseman in the NHL. He'll see some time with the Caps this season. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And he should be making the jump to full-time NHLer by early next season at the latest. Another guy who the Caps are in love with is 19-year-old defenseman Martin Fervry. Fervry was the Caps' second-round pick, 45th overall, at the 2018 entry draft. He was highly thought of back then, and he's only gotten even better since. He is a great skater. He's very strong physically and very strong in all three zones. And in fact, the Caps director of player personnel, Steve Richmond, thinks that Fervry is the best prospect in the entire Capitals system right now, ahead of even Samsonov and Alexeyev. He says Fervry is that good. Here, let me give you a quote actually from Steve Richmond talking about Fervry. He said, and I quote, "He is a powerful skater. He is really strong. He competes like crazy. He's a workaholic away from the rink, a great kid, great attitude. He understands the game. I mean, I thought he could have played for us last year, to be honest with you. At the end of the year, I thought for sure he could play in Washington, no question. I'd be shocked if he is not playing games for us this year. I think he is our best prospect right now. Everyone knows he is good, but he is going to surprise people when the exhibition games start." So yeah, Steve Richmond obviously knows a thing or two about all of this prospect business, and so it's safe to say that Fervry is definitely an A-rated, if not A-plus rated prospect at this point. Much like Alexeyev, Fervry projects to be a top pairing defenseman in the NHL. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Fervry and Alexeyev eventually are the Capitals' top pairing on defense. That's a ways away, obviously, as they still have current Norris Trophy candidate John Carlson locked up for 7 more years. But it's great to know that you have these top-notch prospects to step in whenever you need them to. And like Alexeyev, Fervry is also not far away from playing in the NHL. Like Steve Richmond mentioned, he's likely already ready right now. It's just a matter of getting the opportunity. The Caps, of course, have a lot of depth at pretty much every position, but he will probably see some games this season, I would imagine. The Caps have a number of other interesting prospects who have been developing really well. Among them, forwards like Brian Pinho, who's had a hell of a training camp, Beck Mallenstein, who has been referred to as the Hershey Bears version of Tom Wilson. We love Tom Wilson, and so we love to hear that. Garrett Pylon, Cody Clark, who is the son of former Toronto Maple Leafs fan favorite Wendell Clark, and yes, Cody does play a similar style of game to that of his dad. The Caps have said, actually, that they see a lot of Tom Wilson in Cody Clark as well. Riley Sutter, of the hockey famous Sutter family, which has a decades and decades long track record of churning out good NHL players. Riley Sutter is also huge, 6'4" to be exact. And if you're noticing, there's quite a pattern here. The Caps really, really like big, physically imposing players. And why wouldn't they? That exact blueprint did just win them a Stanley Cup. Hometown boy Joe Snively is also a pretty good prospect at the forward position. And then there's Damian Riat, who showed very well in training camp, and Eric Florchuk, who could end up being a steal out of the 7th round of the draft. He put up 50 points in 68 games with Saskatoon last season. Then we have a couple of guys who are probably, I would say, more well-known to Caps fans at this point. Shane Giersick and Axel Jonsson-Fjallby. Giersick, of course, has already got a taste of NHL action and looked good, really good, during his short call-up to the Caps. He's played just 3 regular season games, as well as 2 playoff games in the NHL, all, of course, with the Capitals. He was one of the Black Aces called up by the Caps during their 2018 postseason run to the franchise's first Stanley Cup. And Giersick actually played 2 games for the Caps during that playoff run. He's a good player. He's got potential. And Axel Jonsson-Fjallby, known for his hair in addition to his hockey skills, is probably one of the most NHL-ready prospects in the system. His ceiling on the Caps is probably as a third liner, but he will be a fantastic penalty killer for you, and he does create a lot of chances shorthanded as well by using his quick stick and his speed. He is a fast motherfucker. He's a very similar player actually to Carl Hagelin, and obviously we all love Carl Hagelin, so we love to hear that as well. And moving to defense, we already talked about the two big guns, Alexeyev and Fervary, but there's a few other interesting prospects who could potentially make an impact at the NHL level as well. We've got Tobias Geiser. He's a 6'5" defenseman who is getting better every year. Lucas Johansson, brother of Nashville Predators center Ryan Johansson. He was Washington's first-round pick at the 2016 NHL entry draft. He's taking, I would say, a little bit longer to develop than the Caps probably would have liked, but it does usually take longer for a defenseman than it does for forwards, and the sense is that they still do expect him to be in the NHL someday. The Caps obviously haven't had to rush him or anyone else to the NHL, what with all of the depth that they have. Connor Hobbs as well is an intriguing prospect because he's probably got one of the hardest shots in the entire AHL. He can really bring the thunder with his slap shot. And then Bobby Nardella as well. We haven't seen a lot of him as of yet, but he was nearly a point-per-game player as a defenseman at the University of Notre Dame last season, so he's got a lot of potential for sure. The Caps actually signed him as a free agent just back on April 5th of this year, so he has not been in the organization for long, but it'll be, he's an intriguing player. It'll be interesting to see how they can work things out with him. Developing him even further, and he could potentially be a really good pickup for them. Overall, out of all of the guys who we've talked about in today's episode, you look at the list of names and you probably want to pick out who could potentially be those few super impactful players, the types of players who could potentially help shape a franchise's future. So I am going to give you my three names. Those three names are Alex Alexeyev, Martin Fervary, and Ilya Samsonov. I truly believe that Alexeyev and Fervary are the Caps' top pairing of the future, once John Carlson's better days are behind him. And Ilya Samsonov, like I said earlier in the episode, he is either going to be the Caps' starter if they lose Holtby, or he is going to fetch them a king's ransom in a trade if the Caps re-sign Holtby. Either way, it's great for the Caps. And that's all I've got for you today, folks. A couple of newsworthy tidbits to squeeze in at the end of the episode here, however. Former Capital Michael Neuwirth was released from his tryout offer with the Maple Leafs, and so his NHL career seems to be in jeopardy. I do not feel bad. I always thought the guy was a douche. And you know who else is a douche? Leafs star Austin Matthews, who apparently thought it was a good idea to drop his pants and present his ass to a female security guard in Arizona. This came after he was apparently trying to break into her car while she was sitting in her car at about 2 o'clock in the morning. She's all alone. He's scaring the shit out of her. So yeah, he's in some hot water over this one. I will be astounded if the Leafs still name this guy as their new captain. And then another former Capital, Troy Brouwer, was also released from his tryout offer with the Florida Panthers, and so his NHL career as well now seems to be in jeopardy. It's almost as if a hyper-talented Caps team did a lot to make some of these guys look way better than they actually were in years past. I wonder if anyone could have predicted that. Oh wait, I did. Anyways, until next time, Caps fans, stay classy. We're only a week away from the regular season now, and I, for one, cannot wait. Let's go, Caps!